the plea across the stars. The great hall of the Galactic Council shook with voices. Hundreds of alien delegates argued, shouted, and pleaded, their words echoing against the tall silver walls. Holograms of burning planets floated above the chamber, spinning slowly, each one a silent cry for help. A warlord species called the Crawl had begun their invasion, sweeping through colonies with merciless fire. They crushed defenses, enslaved populations, and left only smoke behind. Every world feared they would be next. An insectoid ambassador slammed his claw against the marble floor, begging the council to act. A reptilian delegate hissed that if no one stood against the Crawl, their empire would spread unchecked, but most voices stayed silent, afraid. No great power moved their fleets, no empire risked war. The council was filled with words but empty of action. World after world sent transmissions of desperation, their signals bouncing from star to star. But the galaxy's rulers hesitated. In the middle of this chaos, a faint voice broke through the council's chamber. It was not loud, but it carried a weight none could ignore. "Earth has heard your call," the transmission said. Every delegate froze, their eyes widening. The name itself stirred unease. Earth, the Deathworld, a planet known in whispers, a place so dangerous that most species never dared to land, a world where survival meant fighting against poisons, predators, storms, and endless struggle. The people of Earth were not seen as allies, but as monsters born from chaos. For centuries, humanity had kept to itself, trading little, speaking little, fighting only when necessary. The galaxy mocked them, feared them, and sometimes even pitied them. But now, in the darkest hour, it was Earth that answered. The delegates exchanged nervous glances. Why would humanity intervene when the great empires remained still? What price would they demand? And most of all, what would the Deathworlders bring? On a dying world at the edge of the galaxy, refugees watched the stars for help. They had sent their final plea, their cities already burning, their children crying. They expected silence, as always. Instead, their scanners picked up a signal. Deep and steady. A fleet was coming. At first, they believed it must be a mistake. Maybe a patrol convoy. Maybe aid ships. But the signal's signature carried a name that spread terror and awe alike. Human vessels. When the first human ship broke, from hyperspace, the skies lit with steel and shadow. The refugees ran to the cliffs to see. It was no fragile craft, no polished cruiser like those of the council races. It was a fortress of metal, scarred, painted black, covered with weapons, from nose to stern. Behind it came another and another until the night sky looked like it was filled with a new constellation. The Deathworld fleet. No greetings, no grand speeches. The humans did not waste words. Their ships hovered above the planet like predators watching from the dark. Their weapons hummed, charging with silent menace. The alien refugees shivered. Unsure if they had been saved or condemned, an old priest whispered, "We asked for help and the Deathworlders came, but what help do they bring?" Back at the Galactic Council, fear turned into dread. The delegates replayed the human signal, again and again. Some said it was salvation. Others said it was doom. One voice cried out, "The Deathworlders don't save, they fight, and if they fight here, the galaxy will burn." But no one could stop what had already begun. In their hidden war rooms, human commanders studied maps of enemy positions. They marked every Crawl stronghold, every fleet, every colony they had taken. To the humans, this was not just a rescue, it was war. Their orders were clear. When humanity moves, it moves with fire. On the refugee world, children pointed at the sky, their small hands trembling. They saw the great black ships move in silence, engines glowing like angry suns. For the first time in weeks, the people felt a strange mix of hope and terror. They had begged for aid, and it had come, but it had not come in the form of healers or peacekeepers. It had come as death itself, wrapped in steel. The Deathworlders had answered the call. The galaxy would never be the same again. The arrival of the Deathworld fleet, the stars above the refugee world trembled as more human ships emerged from hyperspace. First came the heavy cruisers, their hulls scarred by battles long past. Then came the carriers, vast leviathans that cast shadows across the planet below. Finally, The dreadnoughts appeared, each one a floating fortress, bristling with enough weapons to erase a continent in a single strike. The alien refugees stood in silence, their hearts pounding. They had asked for help, but what they received looked more like the arrival of a storm. On the ground, a young alien child tugged at her father's sleeve. "Are they here to save us?" she whispered. The father looked at the black warships and could not answer. No one could. The fleet hung in the sky like a judgment waiting to fall. The first transmission came not through flowery words, not through politics. It was a simple signal sent across all frequencies. "Humanity acknowledges the plea," the voice said, calm and steady. "Stand by and remain under our protection." The message was short, but every word struck like thunder. Aliens exchanged fearful glances. Protection, they thought, but at what cost? On the lead dreadnought, Captain Elias Ward stood before the command deck's wide viewport. His eyes scanned the system, his mind cold and calculating. He had fought wars across 3 sectors, lost comrades to enemies who underestimated humanity. Now the crawl would learn the same lesson. "Deploy the picket line," he ordered, his voice sharp. "Have the fleet establish dominance. No ship enters this system without our mark." At once, the Deathworld fleet moved with precision. Frigates and destroyers swept into formation, forming walls of steel and firepower, the void between stars. Filled with humanity's war doctrine, order, discipline, and overwhelming strength, the refugees watched as the dark ships moved like predators circling prey. Each engine glowed with fire, each weapon hummed like a beast waiting to strike. An old scholar whispered to the crowd, "This is not the fleet of saviors, this is the fleet of survivors forged on a world where death is constant." His words carried fear but also awe. Meanwhile, on a distant world, the Krull warlord received the news. His generals laughed, their jaws clicking with cruel joy. "The humans," one sneered, "the Deathworlders think they can match us." The warlord grinned, his rows of fangs glistening. "Let them come," he said. "We will show them that legends are nothing before true strength." But his eyes narrowed as he stared at the report. Deep down, even he had heard the whispers. Deathworlders, the galaxy's cursed children, who thrived in places where others perished. The thought gnawed at him, but he cast it aside. Arrogance was the Krull's greatest weapon, and its sharpest flaw. Back on the human dreadnought, the tactical officers mapped the Krull's expected movements. "We have reports of their fleets advancing within 3 jumps, one officer said. "They will come quickly, thinking us weak." Captain Ward's lips curved into a grim smile. "Good," he said. "Then we won't have to hunt for them." In the refugee camps, whispers spread. Some prayed, others trembled. A young alien boy asked his teacher, "Why do they call humans Deathworlders?" The teacher hesitated, then answered softly, "Because their home is a nightmare world. On Earth, everything that breathes, crawls, or grows tries to kill you. The humans learn to fight not just to win, but to survive. And when they bring that lesson to the stars, no enemy can match them." The boy looked back at the black fleet above and shivered. It was hard to see them as saviors, but impossible to doubt their strength. The night passed in silence, but the silence was heavy. Every alien heart beat faster with the knowledge that war was coming. The Krull would not hesitate, the Deathworlders would not forgive, and the stars would soon burn. From the flagship, Captain Ward sent one final message to the refugee world. "Stay inside your shelters, do not interfere. When the Krull arrive, you will see what it means for Earth to answer a call." The message ended, and the humans returned to their silent preparations. No speeches, no promises, only the certainty of war above. The black ships hung in formation like thunderclouds before a storm. The galaxy watched with fear and awe. The Deathworld fleet had arrived, and their fire was ready. First contact, first fire. The silence did not last long. Scouts reported the Krull fleet breaking through hyperspace, their war banners glowing like red fire across the void. The ground shook as the first of their massive warships entered the system. Sleek, sharp, and dripping with arrogance, the refugees looked to the sky with terror, while the Deathworld fleet simply waited, still and silent like wolves in tall grass. On the bridge of the human dreadnought, alarms echoed. Enemy. Vessels detected. Multiple formations inbound. An officer called out. Captain Elias Ward folded his arms behind his back, his expression unreadable. How many? He asked, his voice calm. 40 ships, maybe more. They're moving fast. Closing distance, came the reply. Ward gave a slow nod. Let them come. The crawl commander transmitted across the system, his voice booming through every open frequency. Deathworlders, you dare stand before the crawl, surrender your fleet and we will make your deaths quick. Resist, and we will erase your world from history. The message was filled with arrogance, yet under the words was a faint crack, a ripple of doubt. The Deathworlders did not reply. Their silence was more terrifying than any threat. The crawl ships advanced, weapons glowing with charged plasma. They were used to easy victories, used to watching enemies flee at the first sight of their fleets. But this time, nothing moved. Nothing broke. The human ships held steady, their lines unshaken. It was the silence before the thunder. Then it began. The crawl fired first, streams of plasma tearing through the void, crashing. Against human shields, explosions flared across the black sky. Bright as suns, the refugees cried out, expecting the humans to fall, expecting their saviors to burn. But when the fire cleared, the Deathworld fleet still hung in place, their armor barely scratched. Return fire, Ward said, his voice cold. In an instant, the void lit up with fury. Human warships unleashed a storm of kinetic slugs, railguns thundering, missiles streaking across the darkness like falling stars. The crawl ships staggered under the barrage, their shields buckling, their armor cracking like glass. One by one, their ships began to burn, their engines breaking apart under the relentless strike. For the first time in decades, the crawl fleet knew fear. On the surface of the refugee world, children pointed at the sky as fire bloomed above. It was like watching gods clash in the heavens. Each explosion shook the ground, each blast painted the night red and white. The people whispered prayers, not knowing whether to pray for victory or simply for survival. Back in the council chambers, the delegates watched the live feed in horror. The humans fought with a brutality the galaxy had never seen. They did not fight to push the crawl back. They fought to erase them. No mercy, no retreat, no hesitation. The delegates realized then the truth. When the Deathworlders answered a call, they did not come to negotiate. They came to end the threat. A crawl cruiser tried to flank the human line, its cannons blazing. Ward's lips curved into a thin smile. Engage secondary formation, he ordered. 3 human frigates broke from the line, darting like predators, surrounding the cruiser in a triangle. Their combined fire ripped through the enemy ship's core, splitting it in half. The explosion lit the darkness, a warning to all who watched. The crawl commander screamed in rage, ordering his fleet to press harder, but with every push, the Deathworlders pushed back twice as strong. Their railguns tore apart battleships, their missile storms shredded formations. Even when boarded, human marines fought like predators unchained. One report described a squad of Deathworlders clearing, an entire crawl carrier, their rifles singing, their blades dripping. The crawl had never faced soldiers who fought with such savage skill. Within an hour, the battlefield shifted. What began as an invasion had turned into a slaughter. The crawl fleet was broken, their proud warships reduced to wreckage drifting in the void. For every human ship scarred, 10 crawl ships burned. The refugees below wept, not with sorrow, but with disbelief. They had begged for help, and humanity had answered with fire. On the command deck, silence returned. The enemy fleet was gone, their survivors scattered into the void. Captain Ward stood unmoved, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Of stars. Record the battle, he ordered. Send it to the council, send it to the galaxy. Let them all see what happens when Earth responds. The message was sent. And across the stars, fear spread like wildfire. The crawl had thought themselves unstoppable, but they had never fought Deathworlders. Now they knew the truth. When humanity comes to kill. The Deathworld doctrine. The battlefield was silent now. Wreckage of the crawl fleet drifted through the void like broken bones. burning pieces of metal glowing against the endless black. Where once the crawl had roared with arrogance, now only silence remained. The Deathworld fleet stood victorious, their black hulls scarred but unbroken, their weapons still warm with fire. On the surface, the refugees celebrated, crying and hugging one another. For them, survival felt like a miracle. But inside the human fleet, there was no celebration, no cheers, no songs, no triumph. The humans simply reloaded, repaired and prepared, because to them this was not victory, it was routine. Captain Elias Ward walked across the dreadnought's command deck, his boots echoing on steel. His officers stood at attention, their faces calm, their hands steady. Ward glanced at the wreckage on the screens and gave a simple order. Ready, the Marines were boarding the crawl survivors. The refugees gasped when they heard. Why would they do this? One elder whispered. The crawl are beaten, their ships broken. But the answer came soon. Human Marines launched from the fleet in dropships, their black armor glinting under alien suns. They did not move like soldiers, they moved like predators, silent and focused. Onboard crippled crawl ships, the fighting was short and brutal. The Deathworlders cleared decks with ruthless efficiency, leaving no enemy alive. One Marine squad broadcast their helmet feed to the Council as proof. The galaxy watched in horror as humans stormed through corridors filled with smoke and fire. Every move was precise, every strike final. They did not fight for honor, they fought for survival, a crawl warrior. 3 times the size of a man swung his blade, roaring. A human soldier ducked low, drove a knife into its chest, and fired a burst point blank. The beast fell, and the humans kept moving without pause. Back in the council chambers, delegates trembled. This is their doctrine, one whispered. This is how they fight. Another delegate, a scholar of Earth, spoke with a shaking voice. On Earth, hesitation means death. On Earth, the smallest mistake kills you. Humans learn to strike. First, strike hard and never stop until the enemy is gone. The chamber fell silent as the images of human Marines flashed across the screens. It was not just their weapons that terrified the galaxy. It was their nature. On the refugee world, children stared in awe at the human soldiers returning from battle. Their armor scratched, their visors dark, their weapons still smoking. One child asked, "Do they never rest?" Her mother shook her head, her eyes filled with fear and wonder. "They rest only when there is no danger left," she whispered. In orbit, Captain Ward gathered his officers. He spoke plainly, his voice cold. The crawl thought they were predators. They thought they could crush the weak and rule the stars. But predators don't scare us. Earth is full of predators. We became what we had to be. Stronger, faster, deadlier. That is the Deathworld doctrine. When we fight, we end it. His words spread across the fleet, steady and sharp. No one cheered, no one smiled. They simply nodded and prepared for the next strike. The galaxy began to whisper. Stories spread across trade routes and hidden channels, they said. The Deathworlders did not fight wars. They ended them. They said to see a human fleet was to see judgment. They said that once Earth answered a call, nothing could stop the fire that followed. The crawl survivors scattered into the void, their remaining ships fleeing in terror. But the humans did not let them go. They hunted them, tracked them, and destroyed them. Not out of rage, but out of cold survival instinct. Because on Earth, nothing dangerous is allowed to escape. And now the galaxy saw that same rule applied to the stars. The rescued refugees began to question their salvation. Had they been saved? Or had they simply unleashed something worse? They watched the humans work in silence, their every move precise. No wasted energy, no wasted words. It was as if the humans had been preparing for this moment their entire lives. In the council chambers, fear grew. Some delegates argued, "They are monsters, they cannot be trusted." Others whispered, "They are saviors. Without them, we would all be slaves." But all agreed on one thing. The Deathworlders had changed the balance of power forever. Captain Ward stood before the stars, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon. The war was not over. The crawl would return, stronger, angrier, and when they did humanity would be waiting. Because Deathworlders did not fear war, Deathworlders were war. The galaxy watches in fear. The news spread faster than light. Every network, every channel, every transmission across the stars carried the same message. The Crawl fleet had been destroyed, and it was not by the Council, not by any empire, not by any ancient power. It was by Earth, the Deathworlders across distant planets. People gathered around screens, their eyes wide. They saw images of human warships hovering over burning Crawl wreckage. They saw helmet feeds of human marines cutting through enemies like hunters in the dark. Some cheered, believing salvation had come at last. Others trembled, whispering that a greater danger had been unleashed. In the council chambers, silence weighed heavy. Delegates who once mocked Earth now lowered their voices. One spoke, his scales trembling. If this is how they fight when they answer a plea, what will they do when they fight for themselves? Another replied, if they turn their fleet against us, no empire will survive. The thought echoed through every heart in the room. The Deathworlders had proven they were more than a rumor. They were a storm. On neutral stations, merchants argued, humanity has saved the frontier worlds. One said, but look at the price. Another answered, they burned entire fleets without hesitation. If they bring that fury to our systems, we are finished. The debate grew louder across the galaxy. Were the humans heroes or monsters in disguise on the refugee world? The survivors looked at their saviors with unease. The humans gave them food, water, and medical aid, but their soldiers never removed their helmets, their eyes hidden, their movements sharp and precise. Children watched them with curiosity and fear. To the refugees, the humans were both angels and demons. They had come when no one else did, but the fire they carried was terrifying. Captain Elias Ward sent a transmission to the council. His words were plain and sharp. The Crawl are not finished. They will come again. And when they do, humanity will be there. We will not wait for debate. We will not wait for permission. Where the Crawl go, we will follow, and we will end them. The council trembled at his words. The Deathworlders were not asking for approval. They were announcing their war. In the halls of power, leaders panicked. Some rushed to send envoys to Earth, hoping to form alliances. Others whispered about ways to contain the Deathworlders before they grew stronger. But deep down they knew the truth. Containment was impossible. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy had found a power it could not control. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the Crawl Empire, survivors returned with broken fleets and shattered pride. Their warlord slammed his fist against his throne, his fangs dripping with rage. They dare defy us, he roared. They dare shame us in the eyes of the galaxy. His generals bowed their heads, afraid to speak. The warlord's eyes burned. Then we will show them what it means to challenge the Crawl. But his anger hid the truth that haunted his heart. For the first time, the Crawl had met an enemy that did not fear them, and that fear now ate away at their confidence like rot. Back on Earth, preparations grew. Factories thundered with new war machines. Dockyards swarmed with workers building more ships. Soldiers trained day and night, their drills echoing across steel halls. The humans did not see the last battle as a victory. They saw it as the beginning. Across the stars, whispers grew. Humanity does not answer with mercy. They answer with fury. Deathworlders fight not to survive others, but to erase threats forever. Some races began to pray to them as protectors. Others cursed their name as destroyers, but none could ignore them. The galaxy had learned a new truth. When you call to Earth, you do not summon peace. You summon fire. In the council chambers, one young delegate whispered what many already feared. Perhaps we did not summon saviors, she said, her voice trembling. Perhaps we summoned the storm that will one day consume us all. Her words hung in the air like a blade, and for the first time no one dared to laugh. Above the refugee world, the Deathworld fleet remained, black shadows against the stars, engines glowing, weapons armed, not a fleet of diplomats, not a fleet of heroes, but a fleet of survivors who had learned one truth on their nightmare planet, that survival means fire, and fire spreads. Fury unleashed. The Crawl thought they could recover. They thought one defeat was only a scratch on their empire. But humanity had no intention of letting them rise again. For the Deathworlders, survival meant more than victory. It meant destroying the threat so completely that it never returned. From the dark shipyards of Earth, new fleets rose, dreadnoughts larger than cities, carriers filled with endless swarms of gunships. Factories thundered, soldiers marched, and commanders prepared. The message was clear. This was not a defense, it was a crusade. Captain Elias Ward stood before his assembled officers. A cold fire burned in his eyes. "The galaxy begged us for help," he said, his voice steady. "They thought we would stand guard, hold a shield, and wait for the Crawl to strike again. But Earth does not wait. Earth hunts. We will not defend worlds. We will end this war at its root." His words spread through the fleet. Every soldier, every pilot, every Marine felt the weight of the order. They were not saviors. They were executioners. The Deathworld fleet launched into the stars. Their engines carved burning lines through hyperspace. They did not stop at borders, did not pause for treaties where the Crawl ruled. Humanity arrived with fire. One by one, Crawl colonies fell. Fortresses that had stood for centuries crumbled under railgun storms. Slaves cheered as their chains were broken. But behind the cheers was fear. Because the Deathworlders gave no mercy to the enemy, they left nothing alive that could rise again. On the battlefield, the doctrine was always the same. Strike first, strike hard, and never stop. Human Marines tore through cities with cold precision. Their war machines thundered down streets, their rifles cut through the enemy like lightning. Every Crawl stronghold burned. Every fleet shattered. It was not a war of balance, it was a purge. Across the galaxy, broadcasts showed the fury. Cameras captured human fleets bombarding Crawl worlds until their skies turned to fire. Others showed Marines planting the Earth, flag on enemy citadels, their boots standing on broken thrones. For some, these images were salvation. For others, they were nightmares of the future. If humanity turned this fury on anyone else, no one would survive. The Crawl warlord raged in. His fortress, his fists broke stone, his fangs tore the air with screams. But rage did not stop the truth. One by one, his fleets returned in ruins or never returned at all. He sent assassins, he sent traps, he sent entire armadas, but the Deathworlders cut them all down, like hunters killing beasts in the wild. The galaxy whispered that the Crawl had finally met a predator greater than themselves. On liberated worlds, alien refugees knelt before human soldiers. They called them saviors. They called them monsters. One elder bowed low and said, "You have freed us, but at what price? Your fire has consumed our chains, but it has also consumed our cities." The human commander did not answer. To them, survival was victory enough. The council argued endlessly. Some begged for humanity to stop, afraid the flames would spread too far. Others demanded alliances, hoping to survive by standing close to the storm. But humanity did not wait for permission. They moved system to system, faster than politics, faster than fear. Everywhere they went, the Crawl vanished, in the heart of space. The Deathworld fleet faced the largest Crawl armada ever assembled. Thousands of ships stood in formation, red banners burning bright. The Crawl warlord himself commanded, his throne forged of bone, his eyes filled with fury. He sent one last broadcast across the galaxy. "This is where the Deathworlders end. This is where we crush the nightmare." But when the battle began, the nightmare was his. The human fleet tore through the Crawl line like fire through dry grass. Missiles fell like storms. Railguns split battleships in half. Boarding Marines painted corridors with blood. The warlord's voice, once filled with pride, broke into screams as his flagship burned. When the smoke cleared, only human ships remained. The Crawl empire was finished. The warlord was gone, his throne shattered, his name forgotten. The stars were silent, and the fire was everywhere. Across the galaxy, no one celebrated. No one cheered, no one sang. Because in the ashes of the Crawl, a greater truth remained. Humanity had shown its fury, And now every empire knew what it meant when Earth truly unleashed its power. A new order in the stars. The Crawl Empire was gone, their fleets shattered, their worlds burning, their warlord dead. What had once been the terror of the galaxy was now nothing but drifting wreckage. But as the fire faded, a new silence fell across the stars, a silence heavier than fear. From the council chambers to the smallest frontier colony, every eye turned to Earth. The galaxy had begged for help, and humanity had answered. But their answer was fire, their answer was fury. And now the galaxy wondered, would the fire stop here, or would it spread further? The Deathworld fleet hung in the void like dark giants. Their ships scarred but unbroken, their weapons still armed. They did not return home, they did not retreat. They stood watch, silent and patient, like predators guarding their territory. Captain Elias Ward stood on the bridge of his dreadnought. Staring at the stars, his officers waited in silence, their faces grim. At last Ward spoke, his voice cold and steady. "Send the message." Across the galaxy, screens flickered to life. On every station, every colony, every world, the humans appeared. Captain Ward stood tall, his uniform dark, his eyes sharp as steel. He did not shout, he did not smile. He simply spoke. "You called for help," he said, his voice echoing across the stars. "You asked for salvation," and Earth answered. "We did not come for glory. We did not come for power. We came because the threat you feared was real. And we do not fight halfway. When Earth fights, Earth ends it." His words rolled like thunder. Some aliens bowed their heads in relief, others trembled with dread, but Ward did not stop. "Remember this day," he continued. "Remember what the Deathworlders brought. The next time you beg for help, the next time you cry for mercy, know what you summon. You do not summon peace, you summon fire, you summon fury, you summon Earth." The transmission ended, leaving only silence behind. No one dared to speak, no one dared to laugh. The galaxy had seen the truth. Earth was no longer the shadowed world spoken of in whispers. Earth was a power, a storm, a force that could not be ignored. On liberated worlds, the people lit candles for the dead. They built statues of the Deathworld fleet, some in reverence, some in warning. Children grew up hearing two kinds of stories. Some called the human saviors who had broken the chains of the Crawl. Others called them demons who had burned too brightly. But both stories carried the same lesson. When humanity moves, the stars change. In the council chambers, fear turned into quiet acceptance. No empire dared to challenge Earth now. Instead, they sent envoys, gifts, and treaties, not out of friendship, but out of survival. The council declared a new balance, one where Earth was no longer a silent observer, one where the Deathworlders sat among the powers of the galaxy, but all knew they did not sit as equals. They sat as the fire that could consume them all. On Earth, the people did not cheer or celebrate. Factories kept working, soldiers kept training, shipyards kept building, because they knew another enemy would rise one day, and when it did, they would be ready. For humanity had lived on the cruelest world in the galaxy, and from that world they carried a single truth. Survival is not granted, it is taken, and Earth would take it again and again, no matter the cost. The galaxy held its breath, the war was over, but the storm had only begun. The Deathworld fleet lingered in the void, their shadows cast across, 1,000 stars, their message carved forever into history. Earth had answered, and the galaxy would never forget.